I just want to say thanks to Katarina and to Shivant as well for explaining the need for a transition, but also for centering climate justice in this transition. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about citizenship, which will enhance an understanding of how you or me as an individual can have a place in this transition. And I just want to start with a very basic understanding of citizenship. And I think very important in that is to see that citizenship is about a relational or a relation between individuals and their polity, which is the society and the politics involved with that, and that it's about a constant interplay between rights to, in a way, make use or have freedom in that polity, but also to carry certain responsibilities towards other members or towards the entire community. And then a very normative understanding of within citizenship is the term environmental citizenship. And within environmental citizenship, it's basically the same as the type of citizenship I just explained. The only thing is that people who identify as environmental citizens, or maybe they don't consciously do that, but people that can be seen as environmental citizens, they have a very strong normative notion, and that normative notion is often very close to the idea of climate justice or environmental justice, as we just heard. That means that the rights and responsibilities that I just talked about change a little bit. It gets broader than just the liberal rights to freedom, for example. There's also a right to a clean and safe environment and a right to make use of that environment. And then at the same time, the responsibilities that you as an environmental citizen have feed into these rights. So you're responsible for preserving that environment, and you're also responsible to ensure that everyone in your polity has equal rights. And interestingly, the scale of your polity also changes. It's no longer the nation state or your municipality or maybe your household. But it also takes into account future generations, maybe people that live downstream from a river that you're connected to in case of, for example, water pollution. And it also takes into account environmental parts. So, for example, species living in an ecosystem you're connected to. And these rights and responsibilities then also are there for those species. I hope this gives a bit of an understanding of environmental citizenship just in general. I quickly want to touch upon the acts of environmental citizenship, and I'm going to give two examples to make this a little bit clearer. I think, first of all, there is a politicizing of private behavior. And I think for most of you, it would be pretty clear what it is. It's, for example, conscious consumption. So in your day-to-day individual behavior, you implement those notions of environmental justice. Could also be like boycotting certain brands if you feel they're not acting very just. But on the other hand, there's also a more community part to it, where you're acting upon these responsibilities more towards others in your community, or maybe even organizations or politicians. And that would be climate advocacy and activism. And within both of these two types of acts of environmentalism, so the private behavior as well as climate advocacy, there is always a range in narrow and deep environmentalism. And I want to focus on deep environmentalism, as that is, I'd say, closer to the topics of climate justice that we just discussed. So deep environmentalism would be to challenge the underlying structures that cause these environmental problems. And these can be political, economic, social, can also be, for example, neo-colonial. And what I'm going to do is give 2 examples. And in that, I'm kind of assuming that most of you are in pretty privileged positions, that most of you have the capacity to act, are not directly threatened maybe by climate issues, but that's just an assumption, so maybe this doesn't refer to you. But I think that's also something that is important to take into account when we're thinking about environmental citizenship, that there's a big difference in responsibility to take according to your capacity to act, and that is often based on certain privileges you have, which often come from injustices in the past. That being said, I'm going to give 2 examples. Both are in the Netherlands. So Groningen is an area in the north of the Netherlands, and there's a big field of gas basically under Groningen. So in the past decades, they've been extracting a lot of gas, and one of the results from that were earthquakes. And already since a few years, local communities have been fighting for a right to a safe living environment. That's where one part of the citizenship comes in, the right. And then multiple years later, this struggle was joined by a big group of, I'd say, the climate movement, who had a slightly different struggle in mind, because they felt the responsibility to future generations, but also current generations living in areas that are impacted by climate change. And they, these 2 groups, so the locals and the more international climate movement, joined forces to basically tell the companies active in the gas extraction and also the government to take their responsibility and kind of dialing back on the extraction. So that's an example where rights and responsibilities come together in different groups. And the second example I wanted to give is the fossil-free groups. Some of you might have heard of them. They're pretty spread over the entire world, I think mainly in the US and some European countries. And these are groups of basically students that see a need or a responsibility to act and participate in their community, which is the university, and then point to the responsibility of the university to change their acts. And that's mainly in the investments that these universities do in fossil fuel companies or fossil fuel infrastructure. And this is an interesting example because this is a very dynamic polity that you can see. So a dynamic community. On the one hand, there's the students that participate within their university. They point towards the responsibility of the university in a bigger crowd. And then lastly, these individual student groups interact with other student groups. That's also why it says global, a global community of student groups in different universities acting on the same knowledge and the same principles. I've almost talked for 10 minutes. I just wanted to round off with a few questions you can ask yourself to kind of see how can I act on these notions. I just gave some examples to kind of spark and inspire you to act. And I'd say as an individual, it's important to get an understanding of what your responsibility, but also your privileges are, but never forget that it's mostly well, big corporations, but also politicians that have much more influence to ask. So this responsibility for you can also be telling others to act more responsibly. And I think I'll just leave the slide on for a little bit and not tell all the questions out loud. And I think that's it. I'll give the word back to Lara.
Thanks a lot,